Amara. Who is she?
You should probably sit down.
She's mine, isn't she?
Amara Osei had exactly 6 weeks with her daughter before the father of that child found out she existed. 8 months. That was how long it had been since the divorce was finalized. Since a stack of papers with the Kang family seal had ended a marriage that started as a business arrangement and ended as something neither of them ever said out loud. 8 months since she'd watched Do-yun Kang stand in his father's office and say nothing while the man who was supposed to be her husband let her walk away. And now, here he was, in her doorway, in the small rented house on the edge of a neighborhood he'd probably never set foot in before tonight. Chest heaving, jaw tight, a man people in 3 countries were afraid to look directly at. Standing there like the anger that had driven him across the city had run out of road the second he saw her. Because Amara Osei was not alone. She was standing in the middle of her own living room in a t-shirt that didn't belong to a life he recognized, swaying gently side to side the way exhausted mothers learn to do without thinking. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket the color of butter, was a baby, a newborn, small enough that her whole forearm still cradled the length of it. Do-yun Kang did not move. He did not speak. Every plan he had rehearsed on the drive over, every furious sentence he'd built about betrayal and silence, and the right to know, evaporated somewhere between the door frame and the sight of that blanket. Do-yun, Amara said quietly. Not a question, not quite a greeting either. He looked at the baby. He did the math the way any man does it, fast and involuntary, counting backward from tonight to the last night that mattered. And something happened to his face that his own security detail had never once seen happen in 11 years of watching it. Who is she? He said. It wasn't really a question, either. He already knew. He just needed her to say it. Amara didn't answer right away. She looked down at the baby, then back up at the man she used to be married to, the man who had once been the most feared name in 3 districts of Seoul, and who, right now, looked like he might actually fall over. You should probably sit down, she said. Before we find out exactly what he said next, and exactly how the coldest man in Seoul ended up standing in that doorway with his whole life rearranging itself in front of him. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss where this one goes. Rewind 3 years to a boardroom 11,000 kilometers from that doorway, where none of this had happened yet, and Amara Osei was fighting for something that had nothing to do with love at all. Her father's company was called Osei Cacao House, 4 generations old, a name that meant something in Accra long before it meant anything anywhere else. Amma grew up in that warehouse smell, cocoa butter and burlap, and her grandmother's hands sorting beans by lamplight. And by the time she was 26, she had a culinary degree from a school in Atlanta, and a job offer from a hotel group that would have made her rich and comfortable, and completely useless to the people who needed her. She turned it down. She went home instead. The problem was simple, and it was enormous. A shipment insured through the wrong broker had been lost at sea 18 months earlier, and the debt that followed had attached itself to a supply contract her father signed without reading closely enough. A contract with a Korean conglomerate called Kang Group, whose confectionery division bought Ghanaian cocoa in volumes large enough to keep 400 families employed. The debt clause had a deadline. The deadline was 90 days out. If Ose Cocoa House couldn't restructure the terms, Kang Group had the right to seize the contract, the warehouses, and effectively the family name that had been built for 100 years. "I'll go," Amma told her father the night she found the letter he'd been hiding from her for 2 weeks. "Amma, you don't negotiate with people like that. Somebody has to, and it's not going to be you. Not with your heart the way it is." Effia sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, scrolling through a K-drama on her phone, like it wasn't the worst possible moment to be doing that. "You're literally about to fly to Seoul to beg a chibol for mercy," Effia said. "This is like episode 1 of something." "This is not a drama, Effia. Everything's a drama if the man is rich enough." Amma didn't laugh. Not then. She was too busy packing. Seoul in late autumn was colder than anything she'd trained for. She stood outside the Kang Group tower on her first morning there, in a coat that wasn't warm enough, looking up at glass that went so high it disappeared into cloud, and told herself this was just another kitchen to survive, another set of conditions to work around. She had survived worse kitchens. She had survived worse men. She had not, however, survived a man like Chairman Kang. He met her in a conference room on the 40th floor, alone except for an assistant who never once looked up from his tablet. And he did not offer her tea, and he did not smile. "Miss O. Sai," he said, "you came a long way to ask for what amounts to charity. I came a long way to renegotiate a contract in good faith," Amara said. "There's a difference." Something in his expression moved, almost imperceptibly, the way stone might move if you watched it for 100 years. "There is," he agreed. "Sit down." She sat. She laid out the numbers she'd spent 3 sleepless nights building, a longer repayment window, a slightly higher per-ton rate to offset the risk, proof that Osaka Cowhouse had already replaced the broker who caused the loss. She talked for 11 minutes without being interrupted, which she would later learn was itself a kind of miracle in that building. When she finished, Chairman Kang folded his hands on the table. "Your numbers are sound," he said. "That isn't the issue." "Then what is?" "The issue," he said, "is that I have a son who refuses to be seen at a single public event without a rumor attached to his name, a board that is nervous about a family they consider unstable, and a supply chain problem that would very conveniently solve two issues at once if the terms were different than the ones you've proposed. Amara felt her stomach drop before he even finished the sentence. "I'm not following," she said, though she was. She just needed him to say it so she could refuse it properly. "I'm proposing a marriage," Chairman Kang said, flat as a closed door, "between you and my son. 2 years minimum. In exchange, the debt is forgiven in full. The contract is extended at your original terms, and your family keeps everything they built." For a long moment, Amara didn't say anything at all. "You don't know anything about me," she finally said. "I know you flew across the world to protect people who depend on you, instead of taking a job that would have made your own life easier. That tells me most of what I need to know. And your son? Does he know you're offering him up like a line item?" Something flickered across the chairman's face. Not quite guilt. Not quite regret. Something colder and older than either. "My son," he said, "does not care what I offer, so long as it keeps his name out of the papers. You'll find he doesn't care about much of anything these days." That should have been her warning. She didn't fully understand it yet. That night, back at the small guest house Kang Group had put her up in, she got a call from Mafia, who had clearly been Googling. "Amma," her sister said, voice dropping into the register she used for things that actually scared her. "Do you know who Kong Do-yun is?" "The chairman's son. I'm meeting the terms of a marriage tomorrow, apparently. He's not just the chairman's son. People call him okay. Don't freak out. People call him the coldest man in Seoul. There's like a whole thread about businesses he's connected to that aren't exactly on the level. Nightclubs, shipping fronts. A guy on a forum said his own board is scared of him. Effie, I'm just saying. Marrying into that family is not the plot twist I was hoping for." Amara sat on the edge of the guest house bed a long time after she hung up, looking at the ceiling, doing the math her father had taught her to do, with every decision that mattered. Not what do I want, but what does this protect? 400 families. Her father's name. Effie's tuition, quietly due in 8 months, whether or not anyone in Seoul cared. 100 years of cocoa beans sorted by lamplight. She met with the loyal house manager the chairman had assigned to escort her the next morning. A quiet, careful man named Mr. Yun, who walked half a step behind her and said very little until they reached the private elevator. "You should know something before you decide," Mr. Yun said, eyes forward. "The rumors are true, some of them. Mr. Kang's world is not a simple one. That's comforting. What isn't in the rumors," Mr. Yun went on, "is that he hasn't smiled in front of another human being in longer than I can remember. His mother's death did that to him. Whatever you decide, Miss Osai, You should know exactly what you're walking into. The elevator doors opened onto the 40th floor. Amara stepped out before she let herself think too hard about the answer she already knew she was going to give. By the time she reached the meeting, Chairman Kang had arranged for her to see his son face to face. Her decision was made, though she hadn't said it aloud to anyone yet. She just hadn't seen Kang Do-yun's face when she made it. That was still coming, and it would change everything about the terms she thought she was walking in to negotiate. He was standing at the window when she walked in, back to the door, hands in his pockets, and he didn't turn around right away. "You're the woman my father wants me to marry," he said, not a question. "I'm the woman who came here to fix a contract," Amara said. "The marrying part was your father's idea." That got his attention. He turned. She'd expected, from everything Effia had read her over the phone, someone theatrical, a scowl, a sneer, some visible proof of the danger everyone whispered about. Instead, she got a man with tired eyes and a face carved into something like permanent composure, looking at her the way you'd look at a puzzle you'd stopped trying to solve years ago. "And what do you think of it?" he said. "My father's idea." "I think," Amara said, "that if we're doing this, we're doing it on my terms, not his." Something almost like interest crossed his face. "Almost, I'm listening," he said. She laid it out the way she'd laid out the contract numbers the day before. Clean, unflinching, no apology in it. No real marriage in anything but name. Separate lives inside the same address. 2 years, and not a day longer, unless both of them agreed to it. Her career, whatever that ended up looking like in Seoul, stayed hers, untouched by his family or his business. And respect, actual, basic respect, the kind she wasn't sure his world understood. "One," she said, "we tell people what they need to hear, and nothing more." "Agreed." 2, you don't get to treat me like an asset because your father does. I already don't plan to. 3, if either of us wants out before the 2 years are up for a real reason, we talk about it like adults, not through lawyers. He was quiet for a moment. "You negotiate like you've done this before." "I've never done this before in my life," Amara said. "I've just spent a lot of years making sure nobody gets to decide things for me without my say in it." Kang Do-yun looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd walked in. Something that wasn't quite exhaustion moved behind his eyes. "Fine," he said. "Agreed. All of it." It was, Amara would think much later, the single most romantic sentence anyone had ever said to her. And at the time, neither of them had any idea. The wedding, when it came 10 days later, was small enough to fit in a hotel conference room repurposed for the occasion. A registrar, 2 witnesses, Chairman Kang standing at the back with an expression Amara couldn't read, and Do-yun in a suit that cost more than her father's entire warehouse roof. There were no flowers, she remembered. There was no music. When the registrar asked if she took this man, she said yes in a voice steadier than she felt. And when Do-yun said the same word back, he didn't look at his father once. Afterward, in the car, neither of them spoke for a long time. "For what it's worth," Do-yun finally said, staring out the window. "Thank you for the terms. Most people who marry into my family don't ask for anything except money." "I didn't do it for you," Amara said honestly. "I did it for 400 families and my sister's tuition." "I know." A pause. "That's exactly why I said thank you." The car pulled up outside a building so tall it made the guest house look like a shed, glass and steel rising into cloud the same way the Kang Group tower had, and Amara realized, stepping out onto the curb in a country 12 time zones, from home, married to a man whose own father called him unstable, that she had just crossed into a world with rules she didn't know yet. She had no idea how cold it would get before it started impossibly to thaw. The penthouse was the kind of clean that felt less like a home and more like a museum after hours. White marble, glass walls, furniture that looked like it had never once been sat in. Amara stood in the entryway, her first night there, with one suitcase, and felt something in her chest tighten at the sheer emptiness of it. "It's very—" She started searching for a word that wasn't rude. "Cold," Do-yun said. "You can say it. Everyone does." "I was going to say tidy." The corner of his mouth almost moved. "Almost, mister." Yun showed her to a wing of the apartment that was at least hers. A bedroom, a small sitting room, a bathroom with more marble than her family's entire warehouse. "Mr. Kang keeps to himself, mister," Yun told her quietly, setting her bag down. Don't take it personally if you don't see him for days at a time." She didn't for the first 2 weeks. He left before she woke and came home after she was asleep, and the only proof she had that they shared an address was the occasional light under his study door at 2 in the morning. She threw herself into learning the city instead. The markets, the language apps on her phone, the strange comfort of finding a Ghanaian grocer 40 minutes away, who sold plantains and dried cassava leaf, and looked at her like she'd brought a piece of home into his shop just by walking in. It was on a Tuesday, 6 weeks in, homesick in a way she hadn't let herself feel yet, that she cooked. She made jollof the way her grandmother taught her, rice gone deep red-orange with tomato and pepper and kelewele fried until the plantain edges caramelized dark. And she ate most of it standing at the kitchen island at 9 at night with her phone propped against a sugar bowl, half listening to Effia narrate a drama on the other end of a video call, when the front door opened earlier than she'd ever heard it open. Do-yun stopped in the kitchen doorway, tie loosened, looking for once like a man who'd had a long day instead of a man carved from stone. "That smells," he said, and paused like he didn't have the word for it. Like something. "Sit," Amara said, sliding a plate toward him before she could second-guess it. "It's jollof and kelewele. If you don't like spice, I should warn you now." He sat. He looked at the plate the way a man looks at something he doesn't trust yet. Then he took a bite. He went very still. "Well?" Amara said, when the silence stretched a beat too long. "It's good," he said, quiet like he was surprised the words were true. He took another bite, then another. Amara watched something in his shoulders come down half an inch. Some tension she hadn't even registered as constant until it eased. "My mother used to cook," he said, not looking up from the plate. "Before, I don't remember much of it. I remember it felt like this." It was the first personal thing he'd told her since the wedding. Amara didn't push. She just refilled his plate. "Efia," she said into the phone later that night, after he'd gone back to his study. "I think I just fed the coldest man in Seoul into a coma." "See?" her sister said. Episode 1. The needling started not long after. At a company dinner, Amara hadn't been warned to prepare for. Han Soo-min, a director in the group's finance arm, and Amara would learn. The daughter of a family chairman, Kang had once considered for exactly the marriage Amara was now in. Arrived in a dress that cost more than the whole guest house, and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "So, you're the one," Soo-min said, looking Amara over the way you'd appraise a used car, the temporary one. "I'm his wife," Amara said, pleasant, unbothered. "Temporary or not is between him and me." "It's cute that you think there's a between." Soo-min's smile widened. 2 years, isn't it? I give it less. Across the room, Doyun's head turned. He hadn't heard the words. Not exactly, but he'd heard the tone, and something in his jaw set that made Soo-min's smile falter just slightly before she walked away. "Ignore her," he said, appearing at Amara's elbow a moment later. 2 glasses of something sparkling in hand. "I wasn't planning on doing anything else," Amara said. "Was there something between your family and hers?" "My father wanted that marriage before he wanted this one," Doyun said, handing her a glass. "I said no. She's never quite let it go." "And what made you say no?" He looked at her for a moment longer than the question required. "I didn't want to spend 2 years pretending with someone who'd never once tell me the truth to my face." It wasn't a compliment, exactly. It landed like one, anyway. That night, walking back to the car, his hand found the small of her back to guide her past a step she hadn't seen. Gone before she could fully register it had happened, and Amara thought, with the particular horror of a woman realizing something a beat too late, that something in her had shifted without her permission. She said nothing about it. Not yet. 6 weeks later, at a gala meant to celebrate the very cocoa contract that had brought her to Seoul in the first place, everyone in that ballroom would learn exactly how far Amara Osazi's dignity could stretch before it broke, and how far Kong Doyun would go to make sure it never had to. The gala was held in a ballroom on the top floor of a hotel Kong Group half-owned. Chandeliers throwing gold light over 500 of Seoul's most influential people. And Amara wore a deep green dress her mother would have approved of, and walked in on Doyeon's arm feeling, for the first time since she'd arrived in this country, almost like she belonged somewhere. That feeling lasted until the receiving line. "So, this is the wife," said a woman Amara didn't recognize, loud enough to carry. "I heard she's, what's the word? Exotic. I heard she's the help who got lucky," someone else murmured, not quietly enough. Sumin, standing nearby with a glass of champagne, didn't bother lowering her voice at all. "I heard the Osai family was drowning in debt before this. Convenient, isn't it? A little cocoa, a little charity marriage, and suddenly the foreign girl gets a penthouse." Amara felt every eye in a 10F'd radius turn to watch how she'd react. She didn't flinch. She lifted her chin instead. "My family's cocoa has been in every high-end chocolate house in this city for 2 years," she said. Calm, clear, loud enough to match. Kane Group's confectionery division wouldn't have half its reputation without it. If that's charity, I'd love to hear what you'd call the rest of your supply chain. A ripple of laughter went through the small crowd, not entirely unkind. Sumin's smile thinned. "Careful," Doyeon said, arriving at Amara's side, voice low and even, and somehow more dangerous than if he'd shouted. He looked at Sumin, and at the woman who'd started it, and at everyone else who'd been enjoying the show. Nobody in this room has done a fraction of what she's done to keep 400 families employed. I'd think twice before you decide her worth in front of me." The silence that followed had weight to it. Sumin excused herself first. Later, on the terrace, away from the noise, Amara found Doyeon standing at the railing, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking out over a city that had never once seen him lose his composure in public before tonight. "Thank you," she said. "For that, you didn't need it. You'd already won before I opened my mouth. Doesn't mean it didn't matter that you said it." He was quiet a moment, then unprompted, in a voice she hadn't heard from him before, younger, raw, he said, "My mother died at an event like this one. A scandal broke about my father, something that wasn't even true, and she couldn't survive the shame of it. I was 12. I watched my father decide that night that reputation mattered more than almost anything else in the world. I've spent 20 years trying to prove I'm not like him, and ending up cold in all the same ways anyway." "You're not cold," Amara said quietly. "You're hurt. There's a difference." He looked at her like the sentence had physically landed somewhere in his chest. "You're very good at saying things nobody else says to me," he said. "Somebody should." Neither of them said anything else, but something had cracked open on that terrace, something neither of them was ready to name. And later that night, lying awake in her own wing of that too clean apartment, Amara admitted to herself, only in the dark, that she was not just protecting a contract anymore. She was falling for her own husband. She was, she thought grimly, very good at lying to everyone, including herself. It didn't stop being true just because she refused to say it out loud. Down the hall, in his study, Doyen sat with a glass he hadn't touched in an hour, staring at nothing, thinking about a woman who talked back to rooms full of people who could ruin her, and somehow made it look like courage instead of recklessness. He didn't have a word yet for what he was feeling. He suspected, uneasily, that he didn't want one because a word would make it real. And real things, in his experience, got taken away. The weeks that followed blurred into something neither of them had a name for yet. Not quite marriage, not quite strangers. Something suspended in between that kept finding reasons to close the distance instead of widen it. It became a habit, the late-night kitchen. Amara would come down for after a long day of scouting bakery kitchens across the city, a private project she hadn't told him about yet, a dream she was almost embarrassed to say out loud. And more nights than not, Do-yeon would already be there, Tae-gon, sitting at the island with a file he wasn't really reading. "You're doing it again," she said one night, sliding onto the stool across from him. "Doing what?" "Pretending to work when you're actually just avoiding your own bedroom." He almost smiled, almost guilty. "What's in Uido?" she asked, nodding at the file. She'd learned enough by now to recognize the district's name on a folder. "A shipping contract I inherited that I'd rather not have," he said. "Half my father's business isn't the business on paper. I've spent 3 years trying to move the whole company somewhere legitimate, and every time I get close, something drags it back. Why haven't you told me that before?" "Because I don't tell anyone that." He looked at her, something unguarded in his face for once. "I don't know why I'm telling you now." "Maybe," Amara said carefully. "You're good for me too." The words hung there. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over, slow, deliberate, and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. His hand lingering a beat longer than the gesture required. "Maybe I am," he said quietly. Neither of them moved for a long moment. It would have been so easy. His eyes dropped to her mouth, and hers to his, and the space between them seemed to shrink on its own. And then his phone buzzed, harsh and sudden on the marble, and the moment broke like glass. He checked it. His face changed. "Everything all right?" "Fine," he said too fast. "Just a work thing." He didn't tell her that the message was unsigned, that it contained a single photograph, blurry, taken from a distance, of her outside a Guinean import shop, laughing with a man she didn't know was being photographed, and a caption that read simply, "Does he know where she really goes?" He deleted it. He told himself it was nothing. He did not yet know how wrong that instinct would turn out to be. 2 days later, in an office on the 12th floor with no windows, Han Soo-min met with a man Amara had never heard of and would never meet. A photo editor with a talent for making the innocent look damning, and laid $2,000 in cash on the desk between them. "I need this fixed by Friday," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were a dozen photographs of Amara at that same import shop, laughing, hugging a man, and greeting the way old family friends do. "I need it to look like more than it is. What's the story?" the man asked, already opening his editing software. "The story," Soo-min said, "is that Kang Do-yoon's foreign wife has been meeting another man behind his back for months, and that the chairman finds out before his son does. It took 4 days. By Friday, an envelope sat on Chairman Kang's desk, unmarked, containing photographs that looked, to anyone without the full context, exactly like a marriage falling apart from the inside. Amara noticed the shift before she understood it. A driver assigned to her who hadn't been there before, watching a beat too long. Doyeon coming home later, quieter, a distance opening between them that she couldn't name and couldn't close no matter how she tried. "Did I do something?" she finally asked him one night in the kitchen that had stopped feeling like a refuge. "No," he said, too quickly, too carefully. "I've just had a lot on my mind." She didn't believe him. She had no idea yet how much reason he had to lie. The trap Han Soo-min had built was already closing, quietly, patiently, and neither Amara nor Doyeon would understand how completely until it was too late to stop what came next. Chairman Kang called them both into his office on a grey Thursday morning, and the moment Amara walked in and saw the folder open on his desk, she knew something had already been decided without her. "Explain this," the chairman said, and turned the folder toward her. The photographs were worse than she expected. Not just the innocent hug she remembered, doctored now with a closeness, an intimacy that had never existed, timestamps altered to suggest a pattern of meetings stretching back months. Amara felt the floor tilt under her. This isn't what it looks like," she said. "That's Kwame. He's an old family friend. He does logistics for my father's shipping partners. He was in Seoul for a conference. That's it. That's the whole. There are 11 photographs, Miss Osei," Chairman Kang said, "spanning 4 months. They're fake." She looked at Do-yoon. "Do-yoon, you know me. You know this isn't." But Do-yoon wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the photographs, jaw locked. Something in his face closing like a door she'd spent months prying open. And she understood, with a horror that felt like drowning, that some old wound in him had just been struck exactly where it was rawest. A mother shamed by a scandal that turned out to be untrue. A lifetime of learning that people you trusted could still destroy you. and he was not, right now, capable of hearing anything past the noise of it. "Do-yun?" she said again, quieter. "I need you to leave," Chairman Kang said, not to her, to his son. "Both of you, actually. I need to think about how to contain this before it reaches the press." "Contain it?" Amara said, disbelief cracking her voice. "You mean protect the company, not find out the truth? The truth doesn't rebuild a reputation once it's broken, Miss Osei. Perception does." She turned to Do-yun one last time, searching his face for something. Anything, the man who'd told her she wasn't broken, only hurt. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Say something," she whispered. "I don't know what to say," he said, and it was the most honest sentence he'd spoken in that entire office. And it was also, the one that broke her. The divorce papers were drawn up within the week. Amara signed hers in a lawyer's office with her hands shaking. No one from the Kang family present, except Mr. Yun, sent to witness on the chairman's behalf, his face unreadable, and his silence somehow louder than anything he could have said. "For what it's worth," he told her as she gathered her things, "I don't believe those photographs are real." "It's a little late for that," Amara said. And she wasn't angry at him. She was just tired in a way that went all the way to the bone. She found out about the baby 3 days after the divorce was finalized, in a small clinic near the guest house she'd moved back into, staring at a doctor's face that was trying very hard to be gentle. She sat in that waiting room a long time before she could make herself stand up. She thought about calling him. She got as far as opening the contact, thumb hovering, and then she thought about his face in that office, the door closing behind his eyes, the way he hadn't fought for her when it mattered most. And she thought, with a grief that felt like betrayal all its own, that she would not raise a child inside a family that decided her worth based on a photograph before it asked her a single question. She told Afia. She told her father eventually, once her strength came back. She did not tell Kang Do-yun. She found a small house on the edge of the city through Mrs. Song, an older woman who ran a tiny Hanok bakery 3 streets from the guest house and had taken a liking to the quiet foreign woman who came in every morning smelling like heartbreak and asking careful questions about ovens. Mrs. Song didn't ask why Amara needed somewhere to disappear to. She just handed her a key. Everyone needs somewhere the world can't find them for a while. Mrs. Song said, "Stay as long as you need." Amara stayed 8 months. She built a tiny bakery of her own out of Mrs. Song's back kitchen, sold jollof and kelewela and small batch chocolates made from her father's cocoa to a neighborhood that had no idea who she used to be married to, and she carried a baby by herself in a country that wasn't home, and she told herself most days that she'd made the right choice. She had no idea that 4 kilometers away, a man was starting to unravel a lie that would change everything, and that the unraveling had already begun the day Mr. Yun decided he didn't believe what he'd witnessed. Mr. Yun had kept the doubt quietly for months, the way a careful man keeps most things, turning it over in his mind long after the divorce was finalized, and the household had gone back to its cold, ordinary rhythms. Something about the photographs had never sat right with him. The lighting was wrong in 2 of them, shadows that didn't match the hour the timestamps claimed. He was not a technical man, but he knew someone who was. It took him 4 months to find the right person, and 1 more to convince Do-yun to look at what they'd found. "I need you to see something, mister," Yun said, laying a laptop on the desk in front of him one evening. Do-yun hadn't been sleeping well in months. He looked, these days, less like the coldest man in Seoul, and more like a man serving a sentence he'd handed down to himself. If this is business, it can wait. It isn't business. Mister? Yun opened the file. It's about her. The forensic analysis was thorough, methodical, damning. Metadata that placed 4 of the 11 photographs at a different time of day than claimed. Compression artifacts consistent with digital splicing. A payment record traced through a photo editor's private account to a transfer that originated eventually, unmistakably, from an account belonging to Han Soo-min. Do-yun stared at the screen for a long time without speaking. "She's had a child, mister," Yun added quietly, and watched Do-yun's head come up like he'd been struck. "I didn't know how to tell you until now. I've kept loose track of her since she left. A woman came into a bakery I know, 3 streets from the guest house she'd been staying at. I didn't put it together until recently." "How long ago?" Do-yun said. His voice had gone very quiet. "The baby was born 6 weeks ago, sir." Do-yun did the math the way anyone would. Backward, fast, involuntary, and understood, with a violence of feeling he hadn't allowed himself in months. Exactly what that meant. He confronted Han Soo-min at the next shareholder gathering, in front of enough witnesses that she couldn't simply deny it and walk away. He laid the forensic report on the table between them, without preamble. "Explain this," he said, echoing, without meaning to, the exact words his father had used against Amara 8 months earlier. Soo-min's composure lasted exactly as long as it took her to see how many people were watching. "You are never going to choose me either way," she said finally. Low, venomous, all pretense gone. "I made sure you didn't get to choose her instead. Is that so hard to understand? I watched you love someone the way you never once looked at me. And I decided if I couldn't have it, neither could she." "She left with nothing," Do-yun said, voice shaking now with something that wasn't quite composure anymore. "Because of you. She left pregnant." Soo-min spat. "And never told you." "Because deep down, she knew exactly how little you'd fight for her." "That's not on me, Do-yun. That's on you." The room had gone entirely silent. Chairman Kang, who had arrived part way through the conference, and stood frozen near the door, looked for the first time in his son's memory genuinely undone. "Get her out of this building," Chairman Kang said quietly to security, not raising his voice, which somehow made it worse. "She's finished here. Every board seat, every family connection finished." Su-min was escorted out under the stares of 200 people who until 10 minutes ago had considered her one of the most powerful women in the room. She did not look back. Chairman Kang crossed to his son once the room had begun awkwardly to disperse. "Do-yun." "Don't," Do-yun said. "I was wrong," the chairman said anyway, and the words seemed to cost him something physical to say. "I let the fear of another scandal make a decision I should have let you make with your own eyes open. I have spent 20 years protecting a name at the expense of everything that name was supposed to be for. I'm sorry." Do-yun looked at his father for a long moment. At a man who had, in his own broken way, spent 2 decades trying to keep his family from ever being hurt the way his wife's death had hurt them, and had ended up causing exactly that kind of hurt to the one person who might have healed it. "I don't have time for this conversation right now," Do-yun said, not unkindly. "I have a daughter I've never met." He was already moving toward the door. He drove faster than he should have through streets he barely registered. Anger and grief, and a hope he didn't know how to hold on to, all tangled together in his chest, replaying 8 months of silence and thinking about every day he hadn't known, every day she'd carried that weight alone, because he hadn't fought hard enough to make her believe he would. He was still furious at Su-min, at his father, mostly, unbearably, at himself, when he pulled up outside a small house on a street he'd never been to, and saw a light on in the front window. He didn't knock. He pushed the door, found it unlocked, and walked in already halfway through the sentence he'd rehearsed the whole drive over, and stopped completely when he saw her standing there. Swaying gently, a baby wrapped in a butter-yellow blanket cradled against her shoulder. Every furious word he'd carried across the city went quiet at once. "Do-yun," Amara said. Not a question. "Whose is she?" he asked, though he already knew and needed only to hear it said. "You should probably sit down," Amara told him, and for the first time in 8 months, something in his chest loosened enough to let him breathe. He sat because his legs weren't entirely sure they could hold him standing. Amara lowered herself into the chair across from him. Careful, practiced now, the baby stirring faintly against her shoulder. "Her name is Abena," Amara said quietly. "Born on a Tuesday." It means born on a Tuesday, actually, if you want the least poetic translation in the world. "Abena," he repeated, like he was testing whether his voice would hold the word without breaking. She's mine." "She's ours," Amara said. "I found out 3 days after the papers were signed. I sat in that clinic for an hour trying to figure out how to tell you." And then I thought about your face in your father's office, the way you didn't say a single word in my defense, and I decided I wasn't going to raise a daughter inside a family that could look at me and believe a lie before it asked me a single question. The words landed exactly as hard as she meant them to. Doyon didn't flinch away from them. You were right not to trust me with it, he said. I've had 8 months to think about that morning, and there's no version of it where I don't fail you. I saw those photographs, and some part of me that's been 12 years old since my mother died decided it was easier to believe the worst than to risk trusting someone all the way and being wrong about it again. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth, and you deserve the truth, finally, even this late. Sumin, Amara said. It wasn't a question, either. She forged all of it. Mister, Yoon found the proof months ago, and I was too much of a coward to look at it sooner. He exhaled, unsteady. She's gone. My father removed her from everything tonight. He apologized to me in front of the entire board, which is the closest thing to a miracle I've witnessed in my adult life. Amara studied his face for a long moment, the exhaustion in it, the rawness. The same man who'd once told her she wasn't broken, only hurt, finally sitting in his own version of that sentence. I'm not going to pretend 8 months didn't happen, she said. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't still hurt watching you stand there and say nothing while your father decided who I was. I know. But I also know what it cost you to walk in here tonight, instead of calling a lawyer first. A small, tired smile pulled at her mouth. That's new. I'd like to see more of it if you're offering. I'm offering everything, Dorian said. All of it. Whatever you'll let me be to her and to you. I don't need 2 years in an exit clause this time. I want the real thing, if you'll still have me. Amara looked down at the divorce decree, still sitting absurdly in a folder on the side table where she'd left it months ago. Unable to make herself throw it out, she picked it up, walked to the small kitchen stove, and without a word set the corner of it against the flame until it caught. There, she said, watching it burn in the sink, the paper curling to ash. Now there's nothing official standing between us, except whether you actually mean it. I mean it, Dorian said, standing, crossing to her slowly, giving her every inch of room to stop him if she wanted to. Can I kiss you? You waited 8 months in a burning legal document to ask me that. I'm asking now. Amara, holding their daughter carefully between them, closed the last of the distance herself. 1 year later, the garden behind Mrs. Song's Hannock Bakery was strung with warm lights and full of people who, a year earlier, would never have believed they'd end up standing in the same room together. Mafia, flown in from Atlanta, narrating the entire ceremony under her breath to anyone who'd listen. Chairman Kang, unrecognizable in a soft grey suit, holding his granddaughter with the careful terror of a man determined not to drop the most precious thing he'd ever been trusted with. Mr. Yun, standing quietly near the back, the closest thing to a proud smile Amara had ever seen on his face. Amara wore ivory instead of the plain courthouse dress from 3 years before. And this time there was music, and this time there were flowers, cocoa pods and hibiscus woven together by a florist Effia had bullied into learning both. When the officiant asked if she took this man, she said yes in a voice that didn't shake at all, because this time there was nothing to be afraid of. Not a business arrangement, but a choice. Not a contract with an exit clause, but a promise with none. Not the family she'd been handed, but the one she and Do-yun had built themselves out of ash and stubbornness, and one very good pot of jollof rice. The bakery Amara had dreamed about in that too-clean penthouse kitchen had opened 6 months earlier, 2 streets from Mrs. Song's cocoa sourced straight from her father's warehouse in Accra. A little plaque by the door that read Ose and Kang in gold lettering. And behind the counter, most Sundays, if you looked closely enough, you could find the coldest man in Seoul with flour on his sleeves, learning slowly, patiently, how to fold plantain the way his wife had taught him. Abena slept through most of the wedding, wrapped in a blanket her grandmother in Accra had sent months before she was even born. And later, when Chairman Kang pressed a small gold pendant into Amara's hand, her late mother-in-law's, kept locked away for 20 years, never once given to anyone until tonight, he said only, "I knew the day you walked into my office and refused to be talked out of your own numbers exactly what kind of daughter I was getting. It just took me far too long to deserve you." Amara didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in the last year to last a lifetime. She just smiled and reached for her husband's hand and let the last of something cold in that family finally fully thaw. Thank you for staying with Amara and Do-yun's story all the way to its